Hello and welcome to the second video on the subvariations of variation 34. I decided to make several videos on the subvariations because we have 17 subvariations and I think it would be not very practical to work with having one long video on the subvariations. So I decided to make 3 videos on the subvariations and this is the second one. Subvariation 6 combines bowings on the string with bowings off the string again. We have one figure on the string with one détaché note and a slur, and then we have 3 figures spiccato, and the figure that is on the string alternately starts down bow and up bow. We're working with weight here once again. We need to add weight for the détaché to stop the bow from bouncing. That's this direction, so we add weight through our first finger of our right hand, and we take weight off of the bow by leaning our hand towards the 4th finger. Not as much as I'm showing here, this is a huge exaggeration, but you can feel it in your hand. You lean your hand a little bit towards the 4th finger, that makes the bow light, and then it bounces. So we're working with this once again. Start slowly to get used to the coordination. Don't use too much bow for the figure which happens on the string because you want to stay where the spiccato works best. So you don't want anything taking you too far away from where the spiccato works best. So don't use too much bow for the détaché figure. Practicing it slowly helps the coordination because one does need a bit of time to get used to this détaché figure alternately starting down bow and up bow. For the bars where the détaché figure starts up bow, it can be very helpful to remember this image of the bow going into sand like a spade going into sand. The bow is going into the string, and you feel the resistance of the string like you feel the resistance of the sand when you go into it with a spade. That helps a lot to do the détaché figure up bow and stop the bow from bouncing after the spiccato. Subvariation 6 is supposed to be practiced in 2 ways: forte closer to the frog and piano closer to the middle. So when you do the forte, you're closer to the frog. The bow is heavier, so the bow actually does the forte. One needs a little bit more bow and one also bounces a little bit higher. To do this piano, you move away from the frog where the bow is lighter, so you let the bow do the piano, and your movements get smaller. You bounce less high, you stay much closer to the string, and you use less bow. So all the movements just become smaller, and most important probably is to remember to stay very close to the string when you're further away from the frog, because it's more difficult to control the bow here. The bow is lighter, so that gives us the piano, but it's more difficult to control the bow, so the closer you stay to the string, the more you will be able to control it. In general, make sure that all your string crossings are very close. You don't want the string crossings to be any bigger than they need to be, because that again will take you too far away from the adjacent string. So make sure your string crossings are very close as well. Subvariation 7 is all spiccato, but the figure has changed. We now have 2 string crossings within each figure. It's a good idea with this sub-variation to start slowly to get used to the coordination, because particularly if you've been practicing the previous sub-variations, this sudden change of figure takes some getting used to. It's very important to make your string crossings as small as possible, because now you have 2 string crossings within each figure. So you do not want your string crossings to be any bigger than they have to. Make sure your bow is very close to both strings so that the string crossings are as small as possible. Speed this up very gradually. And what I found very helpful was to listen to the bass line. The bass line is the melody. Listen to that. Have your ear follow that. That seems to help a lot if your ear follows the bass line. Sub-variation 7 is also supposed to be practiced forte, closer to the frog, and piano, closer to the middle. And the principle is the same again. When you're closer to the frog, you use a bit more bow and you bounce a bit higher. And to do the same figure piano, you move away from the frog where the bow is lighter, let the bow do the piano, and all your movements are much smaller. You're much closer to the string. You don't bounce very high at all. In fact, the less high you bounce, the better, and you use a lot less bow. And that way the bow makes the piano. Very important when you play this piano, don't bounce very high. That's probably the most important information I can give you. And just think small. All your movements are much, much smaller to be able to do this piano. And the bow doesn't bounce as high and you don't use as much bow either. One really feels the difference. Doing it forte, one feels one's doing fairly large movements with one's hand, and as soon as you do it piano, it feels like you're almost on the string and all your movements are really small. Sub-variation 8 combines spiccato with slurs, and the slurs are alternately on a down bow and on an up bow. This is the same principle as sub-variation 1 and 2. As always, when we combine spiccato with slurs, it's very important not to bounce too high. The less high you bounce, the better the slurs and the spiccato combination work out. And make sure that you don't use too much bow for the slur, because the slur mustn't take you away from where you do the spiccato. So use very little bow for the slur. And the down bow slur, we're working with gravity, so that's a little bit easier to stop the bow from bouncing in the slur. For the up bow slur, we're working against gravity. That's the more difficult slur. So here again, I find very helpful to feel the resistance of the string for the up bow slur, and to remember this image of the spade going into the sand like this, that you're going into the string with your bow, coming from above from the spiccato. Feel the resistance of the string, and that will help stop the bow from bouncing on the up bow slur. Sub-variation 9 combines spiccato with slurs again. This time every second figure has an up bow slur, and we're slurring 3 notes, so the slur is bigger. and all the slurs are up bow. Just like before, for the up bow slurs, go into the string from above, feel the resistance of the string in your hand, and for the up bow slurs particularly, make sure your string crossings are very close, nearly double stops. For this reason, I found it helpful to practice the up bow slurs as double stops. Because that's more or less the movement that I need, and I'm forcing my bow for the up bow slur to stay very close to both strings by playing both strings as a double stop. So that's a practicing method I found very helpful. And then when you play them as single notes again, play them almost as double stops. The string crossing has to be very, very close for this sub-variation. Do a combination, like almost a double stop, for quite a while before you actually play them completely separate, because one does need to get used to the bow being that close to both strings. In this sub-variation, we're slurring 3 notes, so it's even more important to make sure you don't use too much bow for the slur, because that will take you away from where you're doing the spiccato, because 3 notes of course need more bow than 2 notes. Because of this, I found it very helpful to put an accent on the first spiccato note of each spiccato group. That would in each bar be the first and the 7th note. Put an accent on it by using a little bit more bow, so you're starting slightly below where you want to do the spiccato. You put an accent onto the first spiccato note, which will take you exactly to where you want to do the spiccato. That's where you do the spiccato, and then the slur takes you back down about 1 centimeter where you put another accent on the next spiccato note. That I found very helpful, putting an accent onto the first of each group of spiccato notes. So all in all, I'm using a bit more bow than I did when I just had slurs of 2 notes, but the accent always brings me back to where I want to do the spiccato. So I found this accent on the 1st and 7th note of each bar, that's the 1st note of each spiccato group. I found that very helpful for this sub-variation. Sub-variation 10, we have ricochet again. It's the same as sub-variation 4, except we have 2 string crossings within each figure. So we have the down bow, and then we have up bow ricochet. So it's the same principle as sub-variation 4, just with 2 string crossings. Just like with sub-variation 4, the down bow needs a strong impulse, a kick with a lot of energy, so that the change of direction and the 2 up bow ricochets happen automatically on their own. It's one action. You give the kick on the down bow, the change of direction happens automatically, and the 2 up bow ricochets happen automatically. With this sub-variation, the kick needs to be stronger than in sub-variation 4, because you have 2 string crossings. You've got a string crossing on the 2 up bow ricochets, so you need a bit more energy in the kick in this variation than you did in sub-variation 4. It's a good idea to practice just one figure at first to get used to this feeling like one action. It's one action. You give the impulse on the down bow, a strong kick, and everything else happens on its own. The bow does the rest. Because you've got 2 string crossings this time, you need to move more in a rounded manner. If you don't have string crossings, it's more straight. But since you have two string crossings, it's a bit more rounded. Your kick is a bit more rounded and the ricochet is more rounded because you have the string crossing. Practice just one figure so that you get used to this being one impulse, and then you add the next figure. And you work your way up that way. Then you add the third and the fourth figure. Most important about this is that it has to feel like it's one action. The change of direction happens from the impulse you're giving in the down bow. It happens very quickly after you gave the impulse. That's why it feels like one action, because the kick and the change of direction is one thing. So that's probably the most important thing I can tell you about this variation. You need a strong impulse, stronger than in sub-variation 4, and everything that follows the bow does. It's one action. Okay, that was the second video on the sub-variations of variation 34. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will go on with the next video with the rest of the sub-variations very soon. Happy practicing.